Good morning, and can I welcome everyone to the 13th meeting of Standards Procedure and Public Appointments Committee in 2025. I've received no apologies this morning, but can I just pause to welcome back Ruth Maguire to the committee, and can I also put on the record my thanks to Rona Mackay, who was the substitute for a period of time, and for all of her marvellous contributions to the work of this committee. Our first item of business is to decide whether to take items 3, 4 and 5 on our agenda in private. Item 3 will be consideration of the evidence that we're about to hear. Item 4 is consideration of the approach we will take to the Freedom of Information Reform Scotland Bill. And item 5 is a note on a review of the oral questions that we're undertaking. Are the committee happy to take those in private? Excellent. Then we can move to our second agenda item, which is to hear evidence on the Scottish Parliament elections, etc. Miscellaneous Amendments Order 2025. And I would like to welcome this morning Chris Highcock, Elections Manager and Secretary of the Electoral Management Board for Scotland, and Sarah Mackey, Head of the Electoral Commission in Scotland. Welcome to both of you. If it's all right, I'm content just go straight to questions. And in the first place, I'm going to come, I think, to Sue.
Mr Highcock, I'll come to you first, OK? That's fine, because the EMB have raised some concerns about the proposal to reduce the period of dissolution from 28 to 20 working days. And I think you've said, if I'm in the view of the EMB, this would be an unacceptable change which would place the delivery of elections at severe risk. To limit the timetable to 20 days would leave insufficient time for the postal ballot papers to be produced, dispatched and returned. So have there been any discussions between yourselves and the government since May 2024 that have reduced some of the concerns that you've previously set out?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about the bill, first of all, and to just go through some of our discussion. We've had a lot of discussion with the Scottish Government since that point in time, addressing a lot of these issues. When the concept of reducing the dissolution period was first raised, that was a major concern, particularly in the context, remember, of what happened last year with problems with the delivery of postal votes so close to the UK parliamentary general election. Our concern there was that there would never be any impact on the election timetable itself. So anything that might cause the close of nominations to get closer to election day and therefore give less time for the production of ballot papers would be a great concern. Having spoken to the Scottish Government and the way that it's now drafted, that there's no impact on the election timetable. What happens is just that the Parliament is dissolved closer to the election. So there's an overlap period there that you'd actually still be sitting as MSPs while the election is running. So in terms of the election timetable itself and the deadlines that we work towards, nothing changes, and that was our major concern, and we're happy that's been resolved.
So you're confident that those issues, the postal ballots have been resolved and there's measures in place?
We're happy. We've been reassured that that doesn't impact the election timetable.
OK. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would echo what Chris was saying. We have had very constructive conversations with Scottish Government officials, and we've, any of the major concerns we've had over the conduct order have been resolved, and we thank them for that. There will be a period in which those who are currently MSPs who are standing again for election will then have an overlapping sort of regime in terms of the candidate donation rules and the parliamentary register rules. So we will work with the parliamentary authorities to make sure there is really clear guidance for MSPs on that.
So that's great. So because my next questions were around the implications that we should be aware of in terms of that MSP candidacy thing. So I'm probably looking to try and get some more information and more detail about, because sitting as somebody that would be both MSP and a candidate, etc., it's complicated enough at the best of times. So how easy would it be for us to grapple with that? And is there anything the committee needs to really reinforce going forward?
Well, like I said, I think we'll work with the parliamentary authorities on that, and, and with the standards clerks, and make sure that we can come up with some really clear advice and guidance because there might be things around use of parliamentary resources that just people need to have a clear, you can do this and you can't do that. And that's come up at previous elections.
Yeah.
So that would be our aim. But, but the candidate rules would absolutely apply from the point of the 28 days. It was 27 days, sorry. I think there's a slight tweak in the timetable now.
Okay. Chris, you look like you want to...
Again, we don't really... On our side, we're concerned with the administration of the election. We don't get involved in candidate spending or the behaviour of candidates. Just make sure the elections run properly for the voter.
That's perfect. That's
Thank you. Just so it's right to say that the solution has been to separate the dissolution period, which is in essence a parliamentary question about when we stop sitting as a parliament, and there is now this slight overlap because the election will be underway and candidates will have been nominated and all of those forms done. And because of that separation and the timetable, there isn't a challenge anymore from the delivery of it. And then actually to pick up what Sue was saying, there may well be a challenge over that overlapping week between the role of being a parliamentarian and also the role of being a candidate. And there are already very strict rules within the Parliament about the use of resources. Will you also consider the question of the reporting with regard to resources? Because that could be a potentially difficult decision or choice for a candidate stroke parliamentarian to make over that last week. And obviously, the election is in May. We need as much time as possible. And will you keep this committee informed as to how those discussions are going? Because I think it is important to echo what Sue's saying. It's a very challenging period for individuals, and there's suddenly a myriad of rules that are thrown at them, and it would be good to be able to give people as much heads up so that they can, in their own mind, satisfy themselves that complying with it.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I mean, our job is not to trip people up.
No.
Our job is to help people to be compliant with the rules. And, we can work with as I say, the clerks to make sure we have the most simplified system that works within the two different sets of rules.
That's helpful. Thank you. Emma, can I come to you? Unless any others, sorry, my apologies, any other committee? No. Emma, can I come to you?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the witnesses. I've got a few questions around accessibility changes. Obviously, there is the main change, the detailed description of the tactile voting device requirement. I wondered what update you can provide in terms of preparations to allow for the training that will need to be in place for those assisting disabled voters to be able to take part.
Again, the principle of accessibility is something that's taken very seriously by those that deliver in elections. It's been a principle of the operation of the EMB for a long time that there should be no barrier to anyone taking part in the election. And there's been a particular focus in recent years on the sight loss community. And we've been working with them for a couple of years, seriously looking at the challenges that they have with the existing tactile voting device. You'll have seen it in polling places, so it's a plastic template that sits on top of ballot paper with a window that you can fold back and find. And the feedback we've had from those with visual impairment is it's very difficult to use. The focus is always that a voter should be able to vote independently and in secret, which is the same as everyone else can do. And that just wasn't fulfilling that purpose. And it's been tested. There's a legal view down south which is out there that it's not fit for purpose. However, it's still in legislation, so it'll still be out there. But what we've been looking at is a different type of template that fits more precisely on the paper, and that we've tested it, and those that have tested it have found that they're much more confident in using it in that way. It's been tested at some by-elections recently, and the intention is to have it rolled out for all polling stations for the Scottish Parliament election next year. In terms of training staff, we'll make sure all staff are aware of it, and it'll be on display in all the polling stations. And there's a whole range of accessibility equipment that's there. It's not just tactile voting devices. Voters with visual impairment are very important. We need to support them, but there's a whole number of other people that need support, and that can range from We have overlays to help those with dyslexia, so it makes the distinction of that the paper looks more distinct, the writings comes through with a particular overlay. We have pencil grips to make sure that people can hold the pencil more effectively if that's a challenge. There's additional lighting in booths if that's needed. So the staff are trained in a whole host of different accessibility measures that can be used. The Electoral Commission also in this order have got a responsibility to produce statutory guidance on what we need, and returning officers have to give regard to that. So we work very closely with the Commission and make sure we do what they tell us. But in the training of staff, yeah, that the use of the tactile voting device and in general how to work with voters with visual impairment is something we take seriously.
I think, could I add, we have a consultation open at the moment, which is around, we have drafted guidance on accessibility, and we pre-met during the summer with a number of organisations that we have existing relationships with and who have previously given us feedback on accessibility in polling stations. But now it's out to an open consultation, which ends in, I think, in October. And then, based on the responses from that, we'll be looking at the guidance and whether we need tweaks to that guidance before it's issued to polling to returning officers and their staff. And we will be also on the, I think, 7th of October, we have a joint conference between the Electoral Management Board and the Electoral Commission with returning officers and electoral registration officers across Scotland, where we will have a specific section on the accessibility and very much making the case that this should be at the forefront of their planning and not an afterthought.
There are some other related issues that haven't made it into this order, but I understand there'll still be conversations about what is needed in future. There is the concern around one person being able to help more than 2 disabled voters. That concern about undue influence or control would surely exist for postal voting too, and particularly places like care homes. Is enough being done to protect disabled postal voters?
We provide guidance for care home staff in terms of what is, you know, to what extent are you helping and where is the line that you shouldn't cross.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we'd be looking at kind of getting, you know, we worked with Care Inspectorate years ago to kind of draw up some of that basic information. And that would be something we'd be looking to get out ahead of, because this, you know, very legitimately, you can have somebody from a care home that's taking a minibus of people to the polling station and assisting them, and that's a good thing. You know, but it's about when does it go beyond the line?
Yeah.
You know, when does helping cross into?
Yes.
Yes.
And I guess when you look at other situations as well, there may also be similar residential situations where there's a power centre maybe in the household. I know conversations around free mailings and whether there should be just one to each household rather than candidates being able to send out in stages to different household members. Is there a concern about equalities issues within that as well?
I think that came up, didn't it, during the consultation on the Act rather than the order, and I think it was sort of shelved.
It was a possible secondary legislation introduction later on, but it's not here.
Yeah, it's not here.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I mean, their concern I think was probably cost over anything else. Yeah. But yes, that is something to consider, and because what we know from the work that we do in public awareness is we deliver a voter information booklet to every household at Scottish Parliament elections and local government elections, and then we do public opinion surveying afterwards. And part of this is, did you see the booklet? And we certainly know that the older members of the household are much more likely to say that they saw it. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that they saw it and then they hid it, you know, but I think there's something generational within there, that the younger people wouldn't read something that came through the door. They would go online to get their information.
Yeah.
So that could be, I mean, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at in future is, you know, candidate mailings, and we said this in our response to the consultation on the Act that has been passed, whereas we need to be looking to the future here and saying, actually, the candidate information and all the leaflets, is there another more digital way of getting this information out there?
Okay.
What I would say in response to accessibility in general is that there's always a tension between accessibility and the integrity of the election. So the broader you make it, the easier you make it for people to vote, in some ways you're also making it more open to integrity challenges. So we're very conscious of having to make sure the election is run properly within the rules, that everyone only gets one vote, and that's with undue influence. They're doing it independently without pressure. However, we also need to make sure that people, as many people as possible, are enabled to vote and given access to the poll. So, yeah, there's always that tension. We recognise that. And I think in delivering the election, we do take a pragmatic approach within the rules. There is a concern, there's been a concern at some elections. People talk about family voting when a crowd of people come into the polling place and all gather around a booth. And that's something we're aware of, and the staff will make sure that's not happening and gently and appropriately ask people to step away so that people vote independently and alone. That's the basis of the polling booth, is you're doing something in secret. However, we know there's a tension there that sometimes people will need someone to help them understand the paper or explain what the paper says. So that tension's there, we recognise it, but we're very much keen to make sure we apply the rules for safe, secure and election that's run according to the rules, while recognising the challenges that people face in the electorate.
So should this less prescriptive approach to the tactile devices help with people being able to offer the support that the voter themselves needs, rather than an assumption of
That's the whole purpose of the legislation as it's been drafted. Yeah, it's doing what's appropriate for the voter, not saying this is what you do and that's it. Yeah. This is what helps the people.
You know, we found I think the last Scottish Parliament election there was a regional list that was very long, and I went to a polling station and we had 2 of these plastic templates sellotaped together.
Right.
Yeah. You know, and that's really not.
No.
You know, so we're looking for a more modern approach. Yeah, and I think some of the things that are being trialled at the moment to offer alternatives to the plastic template are much cheaper to produce. You can produce them specifically for each ballot paper, so it fits it exactly. And you're not having to sellotape things together or to try and chop off a bit at the end. And I think that would just give a lot more flexibility to people.
The other thing with the tactile voting devices and support for those with visual impairment, it's not just about the tactile elements, that there's an audio support element as well. So a lot of councils now have audio translation on the website, so you can go to a web page and you can hear the ballot paper read out, or they'll have phone lines where you can phone up and hear the ballot paper read out. And that isn't just for those with visual impairment, it helps everyone. Sometimes you're not quite sure, and reading it, seeing it in a leaflet's not helpful, so you can actually go and hear the ballot paper read out to you. So that the tactile device and the audio support need to go in parallel.
Okay, so just finally then, with the order laid out as it is, are there any critical accessibility concerns that you still have with this in place?
Not in terms of what's there, no. I think it's reiterating and repeating a lot of what we had to apply in 2024 for the general election based on the UK Elections Act. And it's broadening out, so it's doing what's needed, doing what's appropriate. The Commission's guidance that we've seen, the draft of it, is very helpful in that it also gives case studies and examples. It looks for well-behaved and good examples of what returning officers have done in different parts of the UK, and said they've done that really well there. Look at what they've done to support those with visual impairment or learning difficulties or the use of other languages. So you can learn from what other people have done, and as I said, we've got to look at the Electoral Commission guidance, and it is useful, and we do rely on that.
Thank you.
I think you had a...
I did, Convener, thank you. Just briefly. In terms of accessibility, sometimes the issue for folk is actually getting across the door in the first place and knowing that those supports are available to them. What work is happening to let citizens know that support is there? You mentioned the voter information booklet. What format is that in? Is that in a accessible communication style?
The one that will go out to every household will be in English. But we will also have alternative languages available, and we will make, we will advertise those in the booklet that goes to every house. And we'll also have it in BSL as standard in large print and in easy read.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to add something, Chris?
No, just I think one of the things you said was just getting into polling stations, polling places, and every returning officer's got a duty to review the polling arrangements it has regularly, at least every 5 years, and we do all we can to make sure the buildings themselves are accessible. So that's we spend a lot of time going from building to building, whether it's a school, whether it's a hotel or a church hall, to make sure that the route in is accessible, clearly marked, and people can actually find the way in. And then it's our responsibility then in the building itself to make sure that the accessibility arrangements are clearly displayed. There should be a notice saying if you need help, speak to the presiding officer, and maybe a table with what's available in front of people.
I would also like to add, after the election, we do a public opinion survey, and within that, we have a representative group of people who are living with a long-term health condition or consider themselves to be disabled. So we use that data, and then we also run surveys with the organisations that we partner with across Scotland. And there's a number of different organisations that we work with, not just about sight impaired, but learning disabilities and physical disabilities. And they help us to promote our survey, and we gather that data in, and we have a duty to report what we've found after each election, and we do that as part of our election report.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Can I come to you, Annie?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'd like to just talk about the timing of the count, because obviously the Minister wrote to the Electoral Management Board and decided that he was not going to specify a requirement for the count to be overnight or specifically on the order. And I was just wondering, Chris, probably yourself, if you could provide a bit of an update on the returning officer's position on the timing of the count, and would it be consistent position adopted across the country? And is the count going to be either an overnight or the day after the election, the following day of the election?
Morning.
Good morning.
I suppose in answer to that, I suppose it's worth giving a bit of background on these things. The primary concern for returning officers is accuracy of the count, not speed. It's not about rushing through and getting an answer. It's about getting the right answer. It's about delivering a result in which everyone can have full confidence, that the public, the voter and the candidates themselves. And certainly a consistency of approach is very much the focus. Counts across the country undertaken as far as possible at the same time, with results coming around about the same time. With caveats, you can't legislate for helicopters not being there or boats taking a while to get to count as happened. But you've got to remember the geography and the challenges that are faced by some returning officers with boats. I mean, I'm always amazed by the count in Highland, where you've got boats and vans coming up, boxes from Egg getting to Dingwall or Inverness for the count, and it's done well. So the consistency approach certainly is very important. Returning officers, with the encouragement of the EMB as well, have increasingly taken a risk-based approach to all elements of the election. We're aware of all the challenges that can come through, and with the focus ultimately on giving a result that people can trust, it is the most important thing. The convener of the EMB has directed on count timing for elections since 2012. For local government elections, there's a clear direction. These are done on the Friday morning, starting at 9 o'clock. No one does it overnight. This is when you start. You make sure you start by 10, but you start at after 9, and we'll do it the same way. everyone across the country. So 2012, 2017 local government election, 2021 for the Scottish Parliament election, there was a direction on count timing, and again 2022 for the local government elections. Always again addressing risks, making sure that appropriate contingency is in place. The Scottish Parliament election is the most complex electoral event delivered in Scotland. The biggest electorate in terms of just its sheer number and the type of people that are voting, the number of people are voting, and it's a much broader electorate. 2 ballot papers being counted that you've got to keep separate throughout the count. So in effect, it's not only, for example, in Edinburgh, 6 constituencies, we've actually got 12 separate counts going on for that election. And again, for the regional return officers, they're also coordinating it across the whole region, so they can't allocate the regional seats until they've identified the results across all those different constituencies and regions. This year, we've got new constituency boundaries. The Boundaries Commission, Boundaries Scotland, have recommended new boundaries that hopefully will be finalised before the election is delivered. So, but we're anticipating those coming through. And simply the volume of paper that are processed, that is processed in the Scottish Parliament election is huge. So the EMB has consulted with all 32 returning officers on their preferences around count timing, again in the context of the risks of running the election and how you can deliver what people need most safely and efficiently. There was an overwhelming consensus for a particular timing, and the convener is considering a direction on that. It wouldn't be appropriate in this forum to say what that's going to be. Any direction would be made, has to be made under the legislation following consultation with the Electoral Commission and also within the board and with the returning officers. So it's all of the directions, and it's not just about count timing, there's a lot of directions about the data dispatch of postal votes and poll cards. Even the colour of the ballot paper is something that we direct on, which I could let you know that if you want. So all those things are currently with the Commission for their comment, and then there'll be further discussion amongst the board. And we have had some consultation with the Minister already on some of the issues that have been discussed. Consistency would certainly be delivered. It wouldn't be the case that someone would think, I'll crack on with this overnight and get it done. Or someone said, I'm going to leave it till the next day, you can do what you want. So there will be a consistency over the country. And again, it's going to be discussed on the 7th of October at the conference that Sarah mentioned. Around that, as I said, contributing to all these discussions, it's about risk and about what we can do to make sure we deliver a sound count that people have confidence in. Staff welfare also plays into this, particularly. You've got senior staff taking responsibility for a very complex process at which accuracy and clarity of thought are most important. They're making decisions on the validity of ballot papers, sometimes at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when they've been awake since 5 o'clock the previous morning and then working long hours in the weeks leading up to it. Such important decisions demand to be taken by well-rested and well-able staff. So those are the sort of issues that are playing into the discussion. Staff availability, I think we've reported after the last election, it was getting increasingly difficult to recruit staff to work at the counts and at poll. It's easier to get staff to work in the daytime, that they've a lot more staff available. The other thing, elections are increasingly complex with postal voting. We now have in Scotland, about 25% of the electorate are postal voters. It's about 1 million postal voters in Scotland that we're dealing with. A lot of those postal votes come in quite late, and quite a lot of them actually come in on the day, and they have to be verified before they enter the count. So the count can't be concluded, or they can't enter the count until those ballot papers, those postal vote statements are authenticated. So that has to happen before they go into the count, and that can happen overnight, and it's done. We've done that quite happily through the years. But as the number of postal votes increase, that's becoming more challenging. We also think about, as return officers, public engagement and making sure that the public know what we're doing and the results are out there when they can see them and when they're awake enough to take them in. So that's another thing that's flowing in. I might also mention the report that was undertaken following the 2007 election by Ron Gould. You sometimes hear the Gould principle kicked around. The idea that legislative changes should be in place at least 6 months before the election to which they apply. That was only one of the recommendations of Gould. He made a lot, some of which were taken on board, some of which weren't. But one of them he was very clear about was he couldn't see the justification for overnight counts. And he said, if you deliver an election that's going to avoid some of the challenges that were apparent in 2007, he would not recommend an overnight count. Finally, I'd potentially also point to what the Senate are discussing at the moment. I think in Wales they're also discussing these issues, and the recently created Electoral Management Board for Wales are considering the count timing at the moment. Don't know if that answers the question.
I think it probably does, yeah.
The principles are laid out, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Convener.
If you have a...
Convener, yeah, just a brief follow-up. I think we'd all appreciate all the reasons you've laid out, and certainly in terms of being up from 6 a.m. till the following day. I think everyone around this table's probably done that as well. I'm just interested to know if there's cost implications between running an overnight count and running a count in the next day.
It wouldn't be any more expensive, and certainly the staffing cost would anticipate being a bit cheaper.
And would that be because individuals would be paid the less of a rate because it would be a day rate rather than overnight?
We've not looked at the staffing pay rates at the moment, but it's certainly feed into that. But certainly it's a lot of the support services that go along with it. If you're operating an operation in a leisure centre, you've got some of the support staff that are working there overnight. You've got the media. You've got the whole team that's supporting it also need to be paid, and some of those people they'd be doing it on their own time if it's during the day.
Okay.
So we'll be
You'd
certainly
anticipate it would cost less?
I anticipate it would cost less, and certainly it's easier to provide the resources and the contingency support that's needed during the daytime.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Presumably the overnight period between the election and the count would require staffing, security, those leisure centres being monitored. I assume the media would be sitting there waiting for something to report regardless of whether there's counting going on or not. So would that not then also add to the cost?
There would be, I mean, the cost of a security guard and the count, and whether the BBC want to sit outside all night and watch the doors, it wouldn't be charged to the returning officer or to the Parliament. But the cost of a security guard would be much less, and they'd be on duty during the day and probably at a lower rate during the day.
So the security of the boxes overnight?
There'd be no concern about the security of the boxes overnight. They'd be securely kept in locked rooms with security guards in place. There'd be no concern about security.
Okay, but that cost of the security would be someone else's rather than...
No, that would be the cost of the return officer,
right,
which pays. But we'd anticipate that being less. But that's a constant. The boxes would have to be kept secure during transport and during the count anyway.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I suppose just to clarify, because for those people who are watching, they'll say, but the UK general election is always counted overnight. But that's a statutory requirement which doesn't exist, or certainly doesn't exist in the legislation that we've passed here. And actually, the decision consulted upon is out so that, as you've said, Chris, it's about ensuring that, firstly, those people, when they hear the result, can confidently know that it's correct. And secondly, one of the aspects of that is the perhaps common sense approach that tired people are more likely to make mistakes than people who are well rested, and that during, if the count is to happen during the day, maybe 1 or 2 days, it's much easier where there are errors, problems and concerns for it to be dealt with, rather than people who've spent maybe in excess of 12 hours in a polling station coming and doing the count. That'd be fair.
Certainly, and there'd been no intention it would take 2 days.
No.
I mean, if the counts were to be the following day, we'd anticipate the results being ready for the 6 o'clock news that evening.
Because it's the 6 o'clock news? Or
So it would certainly be during the day. And it's, as I said, it's not novel.
No.
The council elections are during the day. And certainly in 2021, the election took over 2 days. That was because of the COVID restrictions, how many people we could get into a hall at the same time. There was a lot of discussion in 2008 at a UK level. A lot of returning officers were agitating at that point for a next day count. And the response of government was to change the law to make it a legal requirement to start the count within 4 hours of the polls closing. So that was the response of government at that point.
maybe one of the benefits of devolution. Can I look at two separate areas, one of which actually slightly concerns me, which is with regard to care experienced young people and the need for a declaration of local connection. Now, obviously the purpose behind this is to make registration on the face of it easier. However, there's a very strong challenge in identifying who this group would be, who is going to speak to them, who is going to inform them and support them in exercising their rights. So can I ask really, who is going to take responsibility to do that and how is it going to be achieved?
Sorry, I think there are two levels to this. There is a local authority level and there is a national level. On the national level, we take responsibility for that. We have a roundtable next week with organisations that work with care experienced young people to explain to them the changes in the rules. And I would say we very much welcome these changes in the rules because the extension up to 21, at the age of 21, while we're not experts in care experienced young people, the feedback we've been getting from organisations who work with them are saying that you can't just say, well, they're 18 and that's it, over. It's up to 21. So we very much welcome these changes. And I did a lot of work with this group of young people in 2014 at the referendum. And so many of them are displaced out of their home authority. And then you could be in Glasgow and you're displaced to Stirling, but why would you want to vote in Stirling? It was different at the independence referendum, obviously, because it was a national result. But if it's a parliamentary election, then it does make a difference if you're out with the area. So we very much welcome this, and we will be having that roundtable next week. There is also a duty on local authorities to reach out to, and I think it's not really. I mean, it's a duty on the returning officer, but I think it needs to be resourced out to those teams that are expert in working with these young people and reaching out to them. I don't think there's anything you want to add.
No, I think in general, outreach to young people, whether they're care experienced or not, it goes through, or we'd support it through local authorities, through education and through the community outreach, community education and through schools.
But this is an unusual message in the sense that the vast amount of voting information is being delivered by local authorities, normally on behalf of returning officers, but on a wider need for people to understand, to the community that's in the schools and the communities in which they live. This, I think, as you pointed out, Sarah, actually is a very remote, disparate community who the reality is the passage of information to that group has never really been particularly successful, if I'm honest, looking. And now we have the UNCRC, now that there is a perhaps more stronger legal obligation, particularly placed on both the Scottish Government and the emanations of state on this, whether or not you can satisfy those human rights with a group that are really hard to identify, that are outside the area in which they would like to express their intention to vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a niche message to a niche group. And certainly in the past, what we've done is worked through, the fostering networks.
Yes.
And those kind of, because to be honest, placements for these young people can break down overnight. Yeah. And they can go to bed one night in one authority and the next day they're in another authority because the placement has broken down. So and it might not be the first thing, well, it's probably not the first thing on their mind as they're packing their bags up to move again.
Yes.
So, you know, that was when in 2014 we worked very much with foster parents to make sure, to say, you know, when they arrive, just say, actually, do you want to be registered? Do you want to vote? To make sure that they could still have their say in the referendum if they wanted to do so. I don't want to prejudge the roundtable that we've got next week, but I can update you after that.
It may be very helpful if you can feed back on that, because my follow-on question, which again I'm sure will be discussed at the roundtable, is the reality of having registered, actually acquiring, in essence, what will probably have to be a postal vote, potentially. Proves very difficult because you're dealing, so returning officers are going to deal with addresses that are outside of the constituency, potentially outside of the region, which in themselves will throw up questions when it arrives in. And to go back to the most well-known Gould principle of the 6 months, it would be nice for the committee to have an understanding of how this is going to be dealt with, because I do have a concern that absolutely the returning officer is the individual who will have to take responsibility for this, but it will be impossible for the returning officer to deliver this aspect of it successfully. I'll just leave it at that. I deeply hope it will work. I'm very confident it will, but a reassurance about the steps that are being taken would be very useful. And my final part is, and this was actually touched on earlier in Emma's question, there was a significant number of things that have been consulted on. This committee received reassurances from the government that a lot of it could and should be dealt with in secondary legislation. And we have, you know, an element of secondary legislation that doesn't go as far as perhaps we expected, or I expected. Is there anything that has been missed that concerns you for the purposes of the election next year? Is there anything that should take a priority for the next secondary legislation that comes through from both the delivery but also that oversight that you have, Sarah?
I think we were content with where we got to on the conduct order for this election.
Yes.
I think I don't like to call it the Gould principle. I just like to call it the 6-month principle. And the 6-month principle, I think, there's a bit of a misnomer that it's 6 months before the poll, but it's not. It's 6 months before the rules need to be complied with. So if it's something to do with campaigners, it's 6 months before the 7th of January. You know, so we're into that kind of period now where it's getting too late. So I think having a bit of certainty going through now that we can then implement our guidance, get all that through, is the right place to be. I think, you know, in future, we would like to see more on civil sanctions, which have come up in this committee before, and there are opportunities through the UK government's strategy on elections that they want to raise the civil sanctions to match the ones that the Scottish Parliament has given us for referendums in Scotland, and that enables us to get around the issue of the overlapping regulatory periods where you might have 500,000 fine for one thing, but a 10,000 fine if it was an overlapping period. So I think there are some really good opportunities ahead. I think, Scott, I think that with devolution, there is so much opportunity. Is almost like a democracy lab. Wales are doing some really innovative things. I'm hoping some pilots will come through in Scotland, in particular around automated voter registration, as they are doing in Wales, and that we can learn from. And it is quite flattering for Scotland, I think, to see that a lot of the UK strategy is now kind of going, actually, this has been a really good idea in Scotland, or this one's been really good in Wales, and we're going to follow that. So I think that's less to do with conduct orders, but maybe to do with further legislation coming down the line after the next Scottish Parliament election. But I think it's really important that we just settle everything just now, so that everybody has a clear picture of what the rules are going into this election. Anything?
No, I think we've been very engaged with officers in the Scottish Government over the last 2 or 3 years on the development both of the Act that went through earlier this year and this order. And very happy that they've taken a lot of the comment on the practical delivery of elections. Again, what can be done in the interest of voters. And some of the things that are in here we're very happy with, like changes around the proxy rules, and just making sure that we need to make sure that people can vote, and if their proxy is suddenly unwell or unable to take part, well, that's great that we can get another one appointed quickly. So very happy that there's nothing immediate that would say that this is going to this would make everything much easier for the election in May next year.
One thing I will add, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, is online absent voting.
Yes.
That needs to come in. I think we're probably getting to a point where it's going to be too late and too disruptive to happen for this election. It was because there was the legislation needed in the UK Parliament, which went through on a private member's bill, which took time. You just wait to get it through. So we're starting to get to the point, and then there's secondary legislation needed in Scotland. So I think we're sort of getting to a point where it will be possibly too disruptive to do now because we're too close to the poll. But I would certainly want to see that in for local government elections in Scotland in future, because I think it's, people phone us up all the time and say, well, how do I apply for a postal vote? And I say, well, you can download this form, print it off, fill it in and send it back. And they were like, people don't have printers nowadays because nobody works like that anymore. So I think that is something I would definitely put a marker down for this committee to keep track of for the next elections.
Absolutely, because obviously the council elections follow a year after the new session starts here, so we're immediately into that final year timetable. And certainly that's very helpful, Sarah, and a note will be made of it amongst other things. If there's nothing further from the committee and there's nothing further that you, Chris, or you, Sarah, would like to add, can I thank you very much for your evidence this morning. I look forward to the additional information as it becomes available on those items, which this committee will keep an eye over. And as always, you know where we are and we know where you are. So can I thank you for your evidence today, and I'll now close the public part of this session. Thank you.